Hello, my name is Sarah Coderre, and I am an employment, labor, and human rights lawyer at Bow River Law in Calgary, Alberta. Today I'll be answering the question, if I got dismissed for failing to get a COVID vaccine, should I be getting severance? Whether or not you're entitled to severance is going to depend on the circumstances of your case. If your employer has terminated you for failing to follow a company policy, you may not be entitled to severance, depending on how the policy is worded and depending on whether or not that policy is reasonable. With respect to COVID vaccines, there has been a lot of litigation and there is still a lot of ongoing work happening in the courts right now to determine whether or not certain COVID vaccine policies and the consequences that flowed from failing to follow those policies was reasonable and whether or not those policies should be enforced. If your company's COVID vaccine policy made it very clear that you had a certain timeline in which to get the vaccine, and also made it very clear that failing to get the vaccine by a specific timeline would actually result in the termination of your employment, it is possible, if that policy was viewed to be reasonable by a court, meaning that it's something that your employer was required to roll out based on the nature of the workplace that you worked in and the role that you had, and the way in which they rolled it out was fair and reasonable, then potentially if you don't get vaccinated and they decide to terminate you, as is outlined in that policy, then you would not be entitled to severance. However, if the policy is not viewed as being reasonable, meaning the employer really shouldn't have been forcing you to get vaccinated anyways because of the workplace that you're in or the type of work that you're doing, or the way in which the policy was rolled out and the specific wording of the policy wasn't reasonable. So for example, the policy doesn't make it clear that you could be terminated if you don't get vaccinated, or it didn't give you enough time to actually consider whether or not you want to be vaccinated. In that case, if the policy is viewed as being unreasonable, then yes, you may be entitled to receive severance. So as you can see, whether or not you might get severance, depending on a COVID vaccine policy that wasn't followed, is going to depend on the circumstances of your case. Every case is going to turn on its own facts, and the specific wording and the factual scenario that led to you being terminated. So in terms of how the policy was rolled out, what communication you had with the employer, what you understood in terms of potential consequences for not getting vaccinated and advising your employer of that, all of that is going to be relevant to the issue and really key in determining whether or not you're entitled to any kind of severance. If you found yourself in that position, certainly we feel for you and we would be happy to help you. If you need assistance understanding your rights under a COVID vaccine policy, reaching out to an employment lawyer is your best bet, and that's what you should do to make sure your specific situation is properly reviewed and you get the legal advice that you need. Thank you.